Berlin, May 1st, 1945, inside the Führerbunker, beneath 15 feet of concrete and earth, the air hung thick with diesel fumes and desperation. Soviet artillery pounded the streets above. Magda Goebbels, dressed impeccably despite the chaos, her hair perfectly styled, moved through the narrow corridors with practiced grace. In her handbag she carried 6 syringes of morphine and ampules of cyanide. The elegant woman who had once hosted Berlin's most glamorous salons, who had smiled from 1,000 propaganda photographs as the model German mother, now faced her final performance. The Goebbels children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holder, Hedda, and Haida, played cards in their small room, unaware. Outside, the Third Reich was collapsing. Inside, Magda's loyalty to Adolf Hitler remained absolute. What she would do in the hours ahead would shock even hardened SS officers and become one of history's most disturbing acts of ideological devotion. Berlin's social elite whispered about the new Frau Goebbels in the autumn of 1931. Magda Ritschl, as she was known before her marriage, had arrived at National Socialist functions with a sophistication that seemed incongruous with the party's working-class rhetoric. Born on November 11, 1901, in the industrial city of Berlin, she had entered the world during Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm era, a time of imperial confidence that would soon shatter in the trenches of the Great War. Her childhood bore little resemblance to the privileged life she would later cultivate. Her mother, Augusta Behrendt, was a domestic servant who had never married Magda's biological father. The details of her paternity remained murky. Officially, she was the daughter of Oskar Ritschl, an engineer who married Augusta when Magda was a small child. However, persistent rumors suggested her true father might have been a Jewish businessman, a possibility that would later require careful documentation management by the Nazi regime. Magda's early years were marked by displacement and uncertainty. When her mother's marriage to Ritschl collapsed, young Magda found herself shuttled between households. She spent her formative years in Brussels, where she attended a Catholic convent school and absorbed French language and culture. This Belgian education gave her the continental Polish that would later distinguish her in Berlin society. Perfect French, refined manners, and an appreciation for European fashion. The Great War brought upheaval. Magda and her mother returned to Germany, where the teenager witnessed the collapse of the imperial order, the humiliation of Versailles, and the chaos of the Weimar Republic. These experiences shaped her political consciousness. She saw her stepfather's business fail, watched hyperinflation destroy middle-class savings, and observed communist street violence in Berlin. Germany's instability left an impression that would make National Socialism's promises of order and national revival deeply appealing. At 19, Magda made her first attempt to secure status through marriage. She wed Günther Quandt, an industrialist nearly twice her age, in 1921. The marriage brought wealth and social position. Quandt owned factories and maintained connections throughout German industry. Magda gave birth to a son, Harold, in 1921. For a time, she seemed destined for the comfortable obscurity of an industrialist's wife. But the marriage proved miserable. Quandt was cold, controlling, and absent, focused entirely on expanding his business empire. Magda found herself isolated in a grand but empty life, hosting obligatory dinners and managing servants while her husband traveled. She began attending lectures and political meetings, seeking intellectual stimulation her marriage lacked. It was during this period that she first encountered National Socialist rhetoric and found it electrifying. The divorce came in 1929. Magda received a substantial settlement, retaining custody of young Harold and financial independence. She was 28 years old, attractive, educated, and wealthy, but also restless. The Weimar Republic's glittering nightlife and artistic ferment left her cold. She craved purpose, ideology, a cause larger than herself. She found it at a National Socialist rally in 1930. Magda attended her first Nazi Party meeting at the Berlin Sportpalast in September 1930. The speaker was Joseph Goebbels, the party's Gauleiter for Berlin, and one of Adolf Hitler's most devoted followers. Goebbels, a slight man with a clubfoot and penetrating dark eyes, possessed an extraordinary gift for oratory. His speeches combined ideological fervor with theatrical technique, moving audiences from rage to ecstasy within minutes. Magda was transfixed. Unlike the tedious industrialists and socialites of her former life, here was passion, conviction, purpose. The National Socialist message, Germany's rebirth, the rejection of Versailles, the promise of national community transcending class divisions resonated with her accumulated resentments and longings. Within days, she had joined the party and volunteered at the local office. Goebbels noticed the elegant volunteer immediately. Most party workers were working-class men or frumpy housewives. Magda stood out, expensively dressed, cultured, speaking flawless French and passable English. She possessed exactly the sophistication the party needed to attract bourgeois supporters and counter its beer hall image. More importantly, Goebbels found her personally fascinating. Their courtship unfolded rapidly through the autumn and winter of 1930 into 31. Goebbels, then 33, had experienced disappointing relationships with women who found his physical disability and fanatical politics off-putting. Magda seemed different. She appeared genuinely attracted to his intellect and ideology rather than repelled by his leg. For Magda, Goebbels represented entree into the movement's inner circle and proximity to power. They married on December 19, 1931, on a farm outside Berlin. Adolf Hitler served as a witness, already signaling the couple's importance within the party hierarchy. The wedding photographs showed Magda in an elegant but modest dress, her expression serene, standing beside the beaming Goebbels. Hitler, awkward in formal wear, stood stiffly in the background. The images would be reproduced thousands of times in coming years as evidence of proper National Socialist domesticity. The marriage proved politically invaluable to Goebbels. Hitler had begun emphasizing family values and traditional gender roles in party propaganda, attempting to broaden National Socialism's appeal beyond its street-fighting base. Goebbels, the movement's propaganda genius, had been unmarried, hardly the image of domestic stability. Magda solved this problem perfectly. She brought her son Harold to the marriage, and Goebbels formally adopted him. The boy, blond and blue-eyed, appeared frequently in propaganda photographs wearing Hitler Youth uniforms. Over the next 9 years, Magda would give birth to 6 children, each given a name beginning with H in tribute to Hitler: Helga in 1932, Hildegard in 1934, Helmut in 1935, Holdine in 1937, Hedwig in 1938, and Heidrun in 1940. Each pregnancy and birth became a propaganda event. Newspapers published photographs of Magda in maternity wear, radiating maternal contentment. Articles praised her devotion to motherhood and contrasted National Socialist family life with the perceived decadence and childlessness of Weimar liberals. She was awarded the Mother's Cross in gold, the regime's highest honor for women, personally presented by Hitler. But Magda's role extended far beyond childbearing. She became Goebbels' social partner, hostessing dinners and receptions that mixed party leadership with artistic and cultural figures. Her salon drew filmmakers, actors, writers, and musicians, many attracted by Goebbels' control over German cultural production, others genuine believers in National Socialism. Magda moved through these gatherings with practiced ease, her French education and quant money giving her confidence among Germany's cultural elite. The rise to power transformed the Goebbels marriage from political partnership into national symbol. When Hitler became Chancellor on January 30, 1933, Goebbels was appointed Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. The position gave him control over Germany's entire media apparatus: newspapers, radio, film, theater, music, and visual arts. He wielded this power with ruthless efficiency, coordinating every aspect of public communication to serve National Socialist ideology. Magda became the regime's unofficial First Lady. Hitler remained unmarried, maintaining his mystique as Germany's devoted servant, who had sacrificed personal happiness for the nation. Eva Braun existed but remained hidden from public view. This created a vacuum that Magda filled, appearing at state functions, hosting diplomatic receptions, and representing idealized German womanhood. Her image was everywhere. Magazines published features on her fashion choices, her child-rearing philosophy, her household management. The Nazi women's organization held her up as the perfect example of femininity: beautiful but not vain, educated but not intellectual, modern but respectful of tradition. She advocated for women's return to traditional roles while simultaneously maintaining a public presence that contradicted this message. The contradiction was intentional. National Socialist propaganda about women contained multiple, sometimes conflicting messages. Working-class women were told their proper place was in the home, raising children for the Reich. But bourgeois women like Magda were permitted, even encouraged, to engage in public service, cultural activities, and social leadership, provided these activities supported the regime. Magda embodied this dual message, demonstrating that educated, sophisticated women could embrace National Socialism without surrendering their refinement. The Goebbels household became a propaganda showpiece. They maintained several residences: an apartment in central Berlin, a villa on Schwanenwerder Island in the Wannsee, and eventually a country estate. Each property was photographed and featured in magazines. The Schwanenwerder Villa particularly captured public imagination, a modernist building with large windows overlooking the lake, filled with contemporary furniture, artwork, and the latest domestic technology. Photographs showed the children playing on the lawn, Magda working in her garden, the family gathering for meals, Captions emphasized their simple pleasures: boating, hiking, spending time together. The reality was more complex. Goebbels worked obsessively, spending long hours at the ministry and frequently traveling. When home, he could be charming, but also temperamental and demanding. Magda managed the household with staff assistants, but the demands of 6 young children while maintaining her public role created constant stress. The children themselves became propaganda instruments. They appeared in newsreels and photographs, always impeccably dressed and groomed, smiling on cue. Helga, the eldest, showed particular poise before cameras. The younger ones learned to perform for public consumption, waving at rallies, presenting flowers to visiting dignitaries, singing folk songs at party events. Their childhood was simultaneously privileged and exploited, shaped entirely by their parents' ideological commitments. Magda took her public role seriously, perhaps too seriously. She studied Hitler's speeches, absorbed National Socialist ideology, and developed genuine belief in the movement's racial theories and expansionist goals. This was not merely performance or opportunism. She became a true believer. Her correspondence and diary entries from this period reveal someone who had found meaning and purpose in National Socialism. Someone convinced the movement represented Germany's salvation. Hitler valued Magda's devotion and frequently visited the Goebbels household. He was especially fond of the children, playing with them during visits and bringing gifts. Magda reciprocated this attention, becoming one of the few people permitted to discuss personal matters with the Führer. Their relationship was complex, part political alliance, part genuine affection, part calculated loyalty. Hitler trusted Magda in ways he trusted few women, and she cultivated this trust carefully. The carefully constructed image began cracking in 1938. Joseph Goebbels, despite his public advocacy of family values and marital fidelity, had been conducting affairs throughout his marriage. His position gave him access to Germany's most beautiful actresses, and he exploited this ruthlessly. Most affairs were brief and discreet, but in 1938 he became infatuated with Lida Barova, a Czech actress working in German film. The affair was different, intense, public, threatening. Goebbels appeared with Barova at film premieres and parties. Berlin society gossiped. Magda learned of the relationship and confronted her husband. Goebbels, intoxicated with passion, refused to end it. He spoke of divorce, of marrying Barova, of resigning his ministry position if necessary. For Magda, this was catastrophic on multiple levels. Personally, she felt betrayed and humiliated. Politically, divorce would destroy the propaganda narrative she had spent years constructing. Her entire identity had become intertwined with being Frau Goebbels, the model Nazi wife. More fundamentally, she had genuinely internalized National Socialist values about marriage and family. Her husband's behavior contradicted everything they claimed to represent. She took the extraordinary step of appealing directly to Hitler. In the summer of 1938, she traveled to the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat, and laid out the situation. She told the Führer that Goebbels wanted divorce, that he was neglecting his duties for an actress, that the scandal threatened the party's image. Hitler listened, disturbed. The Goebbels marriage was a propaganda asset he could not afford to lose. Moreover, he personally liked Magda and felt Goebbels' behavior was dishonorable. Hitler summoned Goebbels to the Berghof and delivered an ultimatum: end the affair with Barova or resign all party positions. For Goebbels, the choice was agonizing but ultimately clear. His identity was inseparable from his role in the movement. Without his ministry, without access to Hitler, without power, he was nothing. He ended the relationship with Barova, who was subsequently banned from German film and forced to leave the country. The marriage was saved but damaged. Goebbels returned to Magda, but their relationship had changed fundamentally. The passionate partnership of the early years became a formal arrangement based on political necessity rather than affection. They maintained the public facade, appearing together at events, allowing photographers into their home, producing propaganda materials featuring their domestic happiness. But privately, the warmth had gone. Magda threw herself more deeply into her public role, perhaps compensating for her private disappointments. She intensified her involvement with Nazi women's organizations, gave more speeches, attended more functions. Her devotion to Hitler also deepened. If her husband had proved disappointing, the Führer remained loyal and supportive. She began to see her primary allegiance as being to Hitler and the movement rather than to Goebbels personally. The reconciliation of 1938 established a pattern that would persist through the war years. Goebbels continued having affairs, though more discreetly. Magda knew but chose not to confront him again. Having learned that Hitler valued the marriage's propaganda utility over her personal happiness, she focused instead on the children, her public duties, and her unwavering support for National Socialist ideology. This period revealed something essential about Magda's character. She was not merely a victim of her husband's ambition or Hitler's manipulation. She had made conscious choices to embrace the regime, to subordinate her personal feelings to ideological commitment, to prioritize her public role over private satisfaction. These choices were not forced upon her. She had wealth, education, connections that could have facilitated escape or resistance. Instead, she chose loyalty, and that choice would ultimately prove fatal. Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, plunging Europe into war. For the Goebbels family, this meant a transformation of daily life and an intensification of Magda's propaganda role. Joseph Goebbels' ministry became more critical than ever, responsible for maintaining civilian morale, controlling information about military operations, and shaping domestic perception of the war. Magda adapted to wartime conditions with characteristic efficiency. She volunteered with the German Red Cross, visited hospitals where wounded soldiers recovered, and appeared at factories where women had taken over jobs vacated by men at the front. These activities were carefully photographed and publicized. She embodied the regime's message that privileged women should contribute to the war effort without compromising their essential femininity. The children also participated in wartime propaganda. Helga, now 7 years old, appeared in newsreels collecting winter clothing for soldiers. The younger children were photographed writing letters to their father at the ministry, depicted as understanding that everyone must sacrifice for Germany's victory. Harold, Magda's son from her first marriage, served as particularly valuable propaganda, a handsome teenager in Luftwaffe uniform, representing the next generation's willingness to defend the Reich. Behind the propaganda, Magda struggled with genuine maternal anxiety. Harold flew combat missions over Russia, facing real danger. Her younger children lived in Berlin, increasingly vulnerable to Allied bombing raids. The Schwanenwerder Villa, once a peaceful retreat, now had an air raid shelter in the garden. The family spent nights in the basement as British bombers passed overhead, listening to explosions echoing across the city. The early war years brought military successes that validated National Socialist ideology in Magda's mind. Germany conquered Poland in weeks, defeated France in months, and seemed poised to crush Soviet Russia in 1941. These victories reinforced her belief in Hitler's genius and Germany's destiny. She attended rallies where captured French flags were displayed, met with wives of victorious generals, and hosted celebrations of military triumphs. Goebbels' propaganda ministry worked overtime to shape public perception. Every victory was magnified, every setback minimized or concealed. Newsreels showed German soldiers advancing confidently through foreign territory, while sympathetic German civilians welcomed them. Radio broadcasts featured stirring martial music and announcements of successful operations. Magda participated in these efforts, appearing in documentary films about women's contributions to the war effort and speaking at events promoting civilian sacrifice. But by 1942, the war's character had changed fundamentally. Germany's advance into Russia had stalled outside Moscow during the brutal winter of 1941-42. The United States had entered the war after Pearl Harbor, bringing vast industrial resources to the Allied cause. Most catastrophically, the Wehrmacht suffered devastating defeat at Stalingrad between November 1942 and February 1943, losing an entire army group and suffering over 300,000 casualties. Magda could not be shielded from these realities. She attended funerals of family friends killed in action. She saw the wounded filling Berlin's hospitals, not propaganda subjects anymore, but broken men with missing limbs and shattered minds. The bombing of German cities intensified dramatically. The Royal Air Force dropped thousands of tons of explosives on Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, and other urban centers, killing civilians and destroying neighborhoods. The regime's response was to demand greater sacrifice while intensifying propaganda. Goebbels delivered his notorious total war speech in February 1943, calling for complete mobilization of German society. Magda stood in the audience at the Sportpalast, cheering his words, raising her arm in salute. She believed, or forced herself to believe, that fanatical will could overcome material disadvantages, that Germany could still achieve victory through determination and sacrifice. By 1943, the gap between propaganda and reality had become unbridgeable for anyone paying attention. Germany was losing the war. Allied armies advanced from multiple directions, Russians from the east, British and Americans from the south through Italy, and preparing for the invasion of France from the west. German cities burned under constant bombardment. Industrial production struggled to replace lost equipment. Casualties mounted catastrophically, hundreds of thousands dead, wounded, or captured. Magda's world contracted. The Schwanenwerder villa was damaged in a bombing raid and partially destroyed. The family moved to a smaller residence, then eventually to bunkers and secure facilities. Her children's lives became dominated by air raid drills and evacuations. The glamorous social life of the pre-war years disappeared entirely. No more salon gatherings, no more elegant dinners, no more trips to the opera. Berlin itself was transforming into a ruin, whole neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Harold, her eldest son, became a prisoner of war when Allied forces captured his Luftwaffe unit in Italy in 1943. For Magda, this was personally devastating, but also ideologically confusing. She had raised Harold to embody National Socialist military virtue, and he had done so faithfully. His capture was not cowardice or betrayal, but simply the mathematics of military defeat. The regime had promised victory, and that promise was proving false. Yet Magda's loyalty never wavered. If anything, adversity strengthened her commitment. This reaction was not unique to her. Many true believers in totalitarian movements become more fanatical as their ideology fails in practice, interpreting setbacks as tests of faith rather than evidence of fundamental error. Magda belonged to this category. She attended strategy meetings with her husband and other Nazi officials, listening to increasingly desperate plans for victory. She nodded agreement when Goebbels spoke of wonder weapons that would turn the tide, of German will overcoming Allied material superiority, of final victory snatched from apparent defeat. Hitler's health was deteriorating visibly. Magda saw him regularly and observed the tremors in his hands, the stooped posture, the vacant stares, but she interpreted these as signs of his burden, rather than indications that Germany's leader was physically and mentally collapsing. Her faith in the Führer remained absolute. She had built her entire identity around loyalty to Hitler and National Socialism. To doubt now would require acknowledging that her life's choices had been disastrous mistakes. The children sensed the changing atmosphere. Helga, now 12, understood more than her parents realized. The younger ones absorbed the adult's anxiety without comprehending its source. They spent increasing time in shelters, their education disrupted, their lives dominated by fear and restriction. Magda tried to maintain normalcy, celebrating birthdays, reading to them, ensuring they kept up appearances, but the strain showed. Photographs from this period show the children looking tired and anxious, their smiles forced. Goebbels himself grew more extreme. His propaganda became shriller, more detached from reality. He spoke of imminent victory when everyone could see Germany collapsing. His ministry produced newsreels showing confident soldiers when the Wehrmacht was in retreat. His radio broadcasts promised wonder weapons and strategic breakthroughs that never materialized. This disconnect between propaganda and reality became so pronounced that even loyal Germans began doubting official statements. Magda participated fully in this fantasy. She gave interviews to foreign journalists, insisted Germany would prevail, and praised Hitler's strategic genius. She visited bomb sites and told survivors that their sacrifices would be vindicated by final victory. She wrote letters to the wives of fallen soldiers, assuring them their husbands had died for a cause that would triumph. These were not calculated lies. She genuinely believed, or had convinced herself to believe, despite all evidence to the contrary. The year 1944 brought the beginning of the end. Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6th, opening a second front in France. Within weeks, they had broken through German defenses and were racing toward Germany itself. In the east, the Red Army launched massive offensives that destroyed German Army Group Center and drove deep into Poland. Romania switched sides, Finland left the war, Italy had already collapsed. Berlin became a city under siege even before enemy forces arrived. Allied bombers struck daily and nightly, killing thousands and destroying infrastructure. Food grew scarce, electricity and water service became unreliable. The population fluctuated as women and children evacuated, while workers were brought in from across occupied Europe. The elegant capital of pre-war years became a desperate, damaged place where people lived in basements and survival overrode all other concerns. Magda refused to evacuate. She insisted on remaining in Berlin with her children, close to Hitler and her husband. This decision was partly ideological. She could not appear to be fleeing while demanding others' sacrifice, but also emotional. She could not imagine existence away from the center of events, from proximity to the Führer, from her role in the regime. Her identity had become so completely merged with National Socialism that physical separation from its leadership would constitute a kind of death. The children's lives became almost entirely underground. They moved into bunker facilities that had been constructed beneath Berlin, emerging only briefly for fresh air and exercise. Their education, such as it was, consisted of propaganda lessons and basic literacy. They were surrounded by SS guards, party officials, and military personnel, all of whom treated them with deference due to their parents' positions, while simultaneously recognizing that Germany was losing, and these children represented a doomed order. Helga, the eldest daughter, began to understand the situation. She was 13 years old enough to interpret adult conversations and read between the lines of official pronouncements. She saw her mother's forced optimism, her father's manic energy, and the fear in other adults' eyes. She knew her beloved brother Harold was a prisoner, probably in England or America. She understood that the explosions overhead were destroying her city, but she had been raised to believe absolutely in Hitler and National Socialism, and this conditioning remained powerful even as reality contradicted it. The younger children lived more in the moment. They played games in the bunker corridors, fought with each other, and demanded attention from stressed adults. Their normalization of abnormal conditions revealed how adaptable children can be, and how thoroughly their development was being warped by this environment. They had known nothing but war, propaganda, and fanaticism. They had no framework for understanding that their parents' ideology was leading Germany to catastrophe and themselves toward doom. July 20th, 1944, brought a pivotal moment. German military officers attempted to assassinate Hitler with a bomb planted in his conference room. The bomb exploded, killing several people, but Hitler survived with minor injuries. The failed assassination triggered a massive purge of suspected opposition within the military and civilian government. Thousands were arrested, hundreds executed. Goebbels played a key role in suppressing the coup attempt and reasserting party control. For Magda, the assassination attempt reinforced her worldview. She saw it as treason by weak men who lacked faith in final victory. She praised her husband's loyalty and decisive action. She expressed gratitude that Providence had spared the Führer. The possibility that the assassination attempt reflected rational German officers recognizing Hitler was leading Germany to destruction never seemed to occur to her, or if it did, she rejected it immediately. Her mental framework could not accommodate the idea that Hitler might be wrong, or that Germany's defeat might be his fault. January 1945 opened with Soviet forces launching massive offensives along the entire Eastern Front. They advanced with overwhelming numerical superiority. Thousands of tanks, millions of soldiers, unlimited artillery ammunition. German forces, depleted by years of attrition, could only delay the inevitable. By the end of January, Soviet troops had reached the Oder River, less than 50 miles from Berlin. The end was approaching rapidly. Inside the Reich Chancellery and associated bunker complex, the Nazi leadership faced collapse. Some officials fled westward, hoping to surrender to Americans or British rather than Soviets. Others committed suicide. A few remained with Hitler, either from genuine loyalty or because they recognized that they were too complicit in regime crimes to expect mercy from any conqueror. Joseph and Magda Goebbels remained, their commitment absolute. Hitler himself had become a physical and mental wreck. He was 55 years old but looked 70, stooped and trembling, alternating between delusional optimism and apocalyptic rage. He spent hours studying maps, showing army groups that no longer existed, planning offensives with divisions that had been destroyed weeks earlier, issuing orders to units that had ceased to exist. His immediate circle knew he had lost touch with reality, but continued to obey. Magda witnessed this deterioration up close and apparently interpreted it as heroic suffering rather than pathological collapse. She had always been enthralled by Hitler, viewing him as Germany's savior and her personal protector. Now, as he crumbled, her devotion intensified. She visited him daily in the bunker, bringing what comfort she could: conversation, food prepared to his specifications, reminders of better times. He seemed to appreciate her presence, one of few people whose company he still tolerated. The Goebbels children were brought into the Führer bunker complex in mid-April. This decision sealed their fate, though they could not have known it. Berlin was completely surrounded by Soviet forces. Artillery shells fell constantly. Street fighting raged above ground. The bunker's ventilation system struggled to filter out smoke and dust. Food supplies were diminishing. The situation was clearly hopeless to any rational observer. But rationality had long since departed. The bunker's inhabitants existed in a bubble of fantasy and denial. They discussed breakout attempts by armies that no longer existed. They planned counterattacks with non-existent reserves. They spoke confidently of relief forces that would never arrive. Goebbels continued producing propaganda, though there were fewer and fewer means of distributing it. Most radio transmitters had been destroyed, newspapers had ceased publication, and the population was focused entirely on survival. Magda managed the children in impossible circumstances. She tried to maintain routines, regular meals, bedtime schedules, limited recreation. The bunker's cramped spaces made this difficult. The children shared small rooms, played in narrow corridors, and dealt with frightened adults who had no time or patience for them. Helga continued to be perceptive, sensing the fear beneath adult bravado. The younger ones became increasingly anxious and clingy, responding to their environment's escalating tension. Hitler celebrated his 56th birthday on April 20th. Magda attended the small, subdued ceremony. Guests included the few remaining Nazi leaders. Martin Bormann, Albert Speer, Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Göring and others. Most were already planning escape or surrender. The party lasted less than an hour. Hitler seemed distracted and exhausted. The celebratory atmosphere was forced, everyone aware this would likely be the dictator's final birthday. Over the following days, the military situation deteriorated completely. Soviet forces advanced into Berlin's suburbs, then into the city center. Fighting occurred street by street, building by building. German defenders, a mix of Wehrmacht remnants, SS units, Hitler youth children, and Volkssturm old men, could only delay, not stop, the advance. The Red Army surrounded the government quarter, then began fighting toward the Chancellery itself. April 29, 1945, Soviet forces were within blocks of the bunker complex. Artillery fire could be heard clearly underground. Explosions shook dust from the concrete ceiling. Time was measured in hours, not days. Hitler made his final decisions. He would marry Eva Braun, formally wedding his longtime companion in a brief ceremony. He would name Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor, and he would commit suicide rather than be captured by the Soviets. Joseph Goebbels decided to remain with Hitler to the end. He composed a testament to be read after their deaths, explaining that he could not serve a regime without the Führer and preferred death to surrender. Magda made the same choice but extended it to her 6 children. This decision represents one of the most disturbing acts of the entire Nazi collapse. She explained her reasoning to those around her, and her words were later recorded by survivors. She believed Germany without National Socialism would be unlivable. She believed her children, as Goebbels' offspring, would be persecuted by the Soviets. She believed it would be better for them to die now, painlessly, than to suffer whatever fate awaited them in a post-Nazi world. Most chillingly, she believed this was an act of maternal love. No one stopped her. Some tried to persuade her to send the children west with departing officials. Helmut Kuntz, the SS dentist in the bunker, later testified that he urged her to let the children live. Hitler's pilot, Hans Bauer, offered to fly them out, but Magda refused all entreaties. She had decided, and her decision was absolute. On the evening of April 30th, Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide in Hitler's private quarters. Braun took cyanide. Hitler shot himself in the head. Their bodies were carried outside, doused with gasoline, and burned in the Chancellery garden as Soviet shells landed nearby. Magda attended the cremation, watching as the man she had devoted her life to serving was reduced to ashes. The following day, May 1st, 1945, Magda prepared to kill her children. The exact sequence of events has been reconstructed from survivor testimonies, though details remain disputed. What is certain is that Magda enlisted the help of SS Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger and possibly Helmut Kuntz to carry out her plan. The children were told they would be evacuated and needed to take medicine to help them sleep through the journey. Magda, or perhaps one of the doctors, gave them chocolate and cake laced with chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative. The children ate and gradually became drowsy. Helga, the eldest at 12, may have suspected something. Some accounts suggest she resisted or needed a stronger dose. The younger ones, from Heide at age 4 to Hilda at age 11, apparently succumbed quickly. Once the children were unconscious, cyanide capsules were crushed in their mouths. Death came within minutes, the poison disrupting cellular respiration, causing rapid suffocation at the cellular level. The children never woke up. They died in their bunker beds, still wearing the nightclothes their mother had dressed them in. The bodies were discovered the next day by Soviet soldiers. They found 6 children laid out neatly in bunk beds: Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hulda, Hedda, and Heide. All were dressed in white nightgowns. Their faces appeared peaceful, as if they were merely sleeping. Photographs taken by Soviet investigators showed the scene and were later used as evidence of Nazi regime barbarity. After murdering her children, Magda spent the evening with remaining bunker occupants. She appeared calm, even relieved, as if a difficult but necessary task had been completed. She spoke with Gerda Christian, one of Hitler's secretaries, about mundane matters. She played cards with others in the bunker. Witnesses later recalled being disturbed by her composure given what she had just done. Joseph Goebbels spent the day dictating final letters and statements. His devotion to Hitler had been absolute, surpassing even his love for his wife and children. He had often said he could not imagine Germany without the Führer, could not conceive of continuing to live in a post-Nazi world. Now he would not have to. He and Magda decided to follow Hitler into death. They emerged from the bunker into the Chancellery garden on the evening of May 1st. Soviet forces were close enough that small arms fire could be heard clearly. The garden was cratered and smoking, littered with rubble from the destroyed Chancellery building. Hitler's funeral pyre had been extinguished but still smoldered nearby. The exact manner of their deaths remains somewhat disputed. Most accounts suggest they both took cyanide capsules, the same poison that had killed their children and Hitler. Goebbels may also have shot himself or been shot by an SS guard to ensure death. Their bodies were discovered the next day by Soviet soldiers, partially burned like Hitler's. The Soviets photographed the corpses and performed autopsies confirming cyanide poisoning. Soviet forces found the bunker complex on May 2nd. They discovered a scene of surreal horror: dead bodies, abandoned equipment, scattered documents, and the 6 murdered children. The soldiers were hardened combat veterans who had seen years of brutal warfare. Yet the sight of the Goebbels children affected them deeply. These were not casualties of battle, but victims of their parents' fanaticism, murdered by the people who should have protected them above all else. The Soviet photographer Yevgeny Khalday documented the scene. His photographs show the children as they were found, arranged neatly in beds, appearing peaceful. The images became evidence at war crimes trials and historical documentation of Nazi regime's final days. They remain disturbing to view, forcing confrontation with the human cost of totalitarian ideology. Harold Quandt, Magda's eldest son from her first marriage, learned of his mother's death and his half-siblings' murders while in Allied captivity. He had survived the war as a prisoner and would eventually return to Germany. The news devastated him. His mother had murdered his 6 younger siblings rather than allow them to live in a post-Nazi world. He later inherited his father Günther Quandt's industrial fortune and became a successful businessman, but never spoke publicly about his mother's actions. The broader German public learned of the Goebbels family deaths gradually as information emerged from the bunker. Reactions were mixed. Some saw Magda's actions as horrific child murder. Others, still influenced by Nazi propaganda, viewed it as tragic but understandable devotion. Most Germans, focused on their own survival in a destroyed country occupied by 4 Allied powers, had little energy for contemplating the fate of the Nazi leadership's children. Allied authorities recovered documents from the bunker complex, including Goebbels' final writings and various Nazi records. These materials provided crucial evidence for the Nuremberg trials and historical understanding of the regime's final days. Magda left no personal testament explaining her decision to kill her children, or if she did, it was never found or was destroyed. The Goebbels family deaths became symbolic of National Socialism's ultimate bankruptcy. Here was the regime's most carefully cultivated image of domestic perfection, ending in murder-suicide in an underground bunker. The elegant woman who had represented Nazi family values had murdered her own children rather than allow them to live without National Socialism. The contradiction could not be starker. Historians have struggled to understand Magda's psychology. How could a mother murder her children? Various explanations have been proposed. Some argue she genuinely believed death was preferable to life under Soviet occupation. Others suggest she was so completely indoctrinated that she could not conceive of existence outside Nazi ideology. Still others propose she was mentally ill, driven to psychosis by years of stress and propaganda. The truth likely combines these factors. Magda had invested everything, her identity, her social position, her sense of purpose, in National Socialism. She had subordinated her personal feelings, tolerated her husband's infidelities, and devoted herself entirely to serving the regime. To admit that this ideology was false would require acknowledging that her entire adult life had been wasted in service to evil. This admission may have been psychologically impossible. Moreover, she had been present for years of Nazi indoctrination about inferior races, about the necessity of hardness, about choosing death over defeat. The regime had glorified suicide as heroic when faced with impossible situations. It had praised mothers who sacrificed their sons for Germany. In murdering her children, Magda may have believed she was acting according to the values she had spent years promoting. The children themselves remain history's victims. They had no choice in their parents' ideology, no agency in the decisions that led to their deaths. Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holder, Hedda, and Haida were killed because their mother preferred them dead to living in a world that had rejected National Socialism. Their individual personalities, hopes, and potential futures were erased by parental fanaticism. Post-war Germany struggled with the Goebbels legacy. The family had been so thoroughly associated with Nazi propaganda that their story became a cautionary tale. Magda, in particular, represented the danger of women's complicity in totalitarian regimes. She had not been a passive victim of her husband's ambitions, but an active, enthusiastic participant in Nazi ideological promotion. Her elegance and sophistication had made the regime more palatable to bourgeois Germans who might otherwise have been repelled by its vulgarity. The murder of the Goebbels children also forced confrontation with uncomfortable questions about parental rights and responsibilities under extreme conditions. Did Magda have the right to make this decision for her children? Would the children indeed have suffered terrible fates under Soviet occupation? These questions remain ethically complex, though the overwhelming consensus is that murdering sleeping children is never justified, regardless of anticipated future suffering. The physical locations associated with the Goebbels family were systematically erased. The Schwanenwerder villa was destroyed, the bunker complex was blown up by the Soviets and buried. The grave sites of Joseph and Magda were never marked. This erasure was intentional. German authorities wanted no shrines to Nazi figures, no places for neo-Nazi pilgrimage. The Goebbels family was to be remembered as a warning, not venerated as martyrs. Yet memory persists. The photographs of the murdered children continue to disturb. Documentaries recount the family's story. Historians analyze Magda's choices. The Goebbels family remains a compelling, horrifying case study in ideological fanaticism, showing how intelligence, education, and sophistication offer no protection against totalitarian seduction when someone willingly surrenders critical judgment to dogma. Magda Goebbels' life and death raise profound questions about complicity, agency, and responsibility in totalitarian systems. She was not a peripheral figure who stumbled into association with Nazism, nor was she coerced into her role. She actively sought out the Nazi Party, eagerly embraced its ideology, and worked tirelessly to promote its values. Her sophistication and education made her complicity more effective, not less culpable. The question of whether she was a victim or perpetrator admits no simple answer. She experienced genuine suffering: her husband's infidelities, the stress of war, the loss of her son to captivity, the destruction of her world, but she also benefited enormously from the regime. Wealth, status, power, and purpose. More importantly, she actively participated in promoting an ideology that caused immeasurable suffering to millions. Her glamorous image helped make Nazism acceptable to Germans who might otherwise have resisted its brutality. Gender complicates the analysis. National Socialist ideology claimed to confine women to domestic roles while simultaneously deploying certain women like Magda in public propaganda functions. She navigated this contradiction successfully, presenting herself as primarily a mother and wife, while actually wielding significant influence. This allowed the regime to have it both ways, maintaining traditional gender rhetoric while using sophisticated women to expand its appeal. Magda's social class also mattered. She was educated, cultured, and wealthy, exactly the type of person who might have been expected to resist Nazi vulgarity. Instead, she legitimized the movement for bourgeois Germans. Her salon brought together party leaders and cultural figures, creating networks that helped Nazism penetrate German high culture. Her marriage to Goebbels similarly elevated him from demagogue to respectable minister. The murder of her children represents the ultimate expression of totalitarian logic. When ideology becomes more important than human life, when loyalty to a movement supersedes love for one's own children, the result is atrocity. Magda's actions in the bunker were consistent with years of prioritizing Nazi ideology over personal relationships and human considerations. She had been willing to subordinate her own happiness to the regime. Ultimately, she was willing to subordinate her children's lives. Post-war trials of Nazi officials generally excluded women like Magda, who had died before capture. This has sometimes led to underestimation of women's roles in the regime. Magda was not unusual in her devotion to National Socialism. Millions of German women supported the movement, participated in its organizations, and helped implement its policies. Her prominence makes her story more documented, but not fundamentally different from patterns of female complicity throughout Nazi Germany. The psychological mechanism of her commitment deserves consideration. Totalitarian movements offer converts powerful psychological rewards: a sense of purpose, belonging to something greater than oneself, clear answers to complex questions, and permission to express hostility toward designated enemies. For someone like Magda, who experienced early abandonment and instability, National Socialism provided structure, meaning, and identity. Surrendering these required more strength than maintaining them, even in the face of catastrophic failure. Her relationship with Hitler was central to her story. She appears to have genuinely adored him, seeing him as a father figure, savior, and object of devotion. This personal attachment made abandoning the ideology psychologically impossible. It would have required rejecting not just political beliefs, but the man she had spent years worshipping. In the end, her loyalty to Hitler proved stronger than her maternal instinct for preservation. The Goebbels children's deaths continue to haunt historical memory because they represent the reduction of human beings to ideological abstractions. Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holder, Hedda, and Haida were not abstract concepts, but specific individuals with personalities, preferences, and potential. Their mother's decision to murder them, rather than allow them to continue living, reveals how completely ideology can corrupt natural human feeling. Magda Goebbels died as she had lived in her final years. completely devoted to Adolf Hitler and National Socialist ideology, willing to sacrifice everything, including her children, rather than abandon her beliefs. Her life trajectory from abandoned child to society hostess to mass murderer demonstrates how totalitarian movements recruit and transform individuals, particularly those seeking purpose and identity. The historical judgment on Magda has been overwhelmingly negative, and rightly so. She participated actively in promoting an ideology responsible for genocide, aggressive war, and unprecedented human suffering. She used her social position and cultural sophistication to make Nazism more palatable. She raised her children to serve the regime, and ultimately she murdered them rather than allow them to live free of Nazi ideology. Yet her story remains important precisely because she was not a cartoon villain. She was intelligent, educated, and capable of genuine affection. She loved her children by all accounts in her own way. She experienced real suffering and betrayal. These human qualities make her crimes more rather than less disturbing. They demonstrate that ordinary human beings with recognizable emotions and motivations can commit extraordinary evil when they surrender moral judgment to ideology. The broader lesson of the Goebbels family concerns the dangers of totalistic thinking. National Socialism demanded complete commitment, absolute loyalty, and subordination of personal judgment to party doctrine. It promised meaning, purpose, and belonging in exchange for this surrender. Millions of Germans accepted the bargain, and the result was catastrophe. Magda's story illustrates this dynamic with particular clarity, because her public role made her choices so well documented. Germany's post-war reckoning with Nazism required confronting figures like Magda, not just the obvious monsters, but the sophisticated enablers who made the regime function. The elegant woman hosting salon gatherings was as essential to Nazi success as the concentration camp guard. Perhaps more so because she helped make the movement socially acceptable. Understanding her complicity is crucial for understanding how totalitarian systems recruit and deploy supporters across all social levels. The murdered children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holder, Hedda, and Haida, deserve remembrance as individuals rather than symbols. They were not abstract casualties of history, but specific young people with distinct personalities. Helga showed intelligence and perceptiveness. Helmut was energetic and curious. The girls each had their own temperaments and preferences. They all died because their mother valued ideology more than their lives. Harold Quandt, the surviving son, lived with the knowledge of what his mother had done. He built a successful business career and raised a family, but never publicly discussed his mother's actions or his half-siblings' deaths. His silence suggests trauma too deep for expression. How does one process the knowledge that one's mother murdered one's siblings in service to a failed ideology? The physical traces of the Goebbels family have been deliberately erased from the landscape. No monuments mark their graves. Their homes have been destroyed or repurposed. The bunker where they died has been buried and built over. This erasure serves a purpose, preventing neo-Nazi shrine-making and avoiding glorification. But it also means that engagement with their story must happen through historical documentation rather than physical sites. Magda's story resonates today because totalitarian thinking has not disappeared. Movements still arise, promising simple answers to complex problems, demanding absolute loyalty, and dividing the world into absolute good and evil. The psychological mechanisms that recruited Magda, need for purpose, desire for belonging, willingness to surrender judgment to authority, remain part of human nature. Her life stands as a warning about where such surrender leads. The final image of Magda Goebbels should be neither sympathetic nor sensationalized. She was a human being who made catastrophic moral choices, who allowed ideology to corrupt natural feeling, and who ultimately committed one of history's most disturbing acts of child murder. She was responsible for her actions, despite the context and pressures she faced. Her legacy is one of destruction of her children, her family, and ultimately herself, all sacrificed to a poisonous ideology that promised greatness and delivered only ruin. Magda Goebbels remains one of the Third Reich's most disturbing figures, precisely because she defies simple categorization. She was neither coerced victim nor sadistic monster, but rather an intelligent, educated woman who willingly embraced totalitarian ideology and followed it to its logical, horrifying conclusion. Her elegance and sophistication made National Socialism more acceptable to Germans who might otherwise have resisted its vulgarity. Her devotion to Hitler and to Nazi family propaganda helped the regime maintain its image even as it committed unprecedented crimes. The murder of her 6 children in the Führer bunker represents the ultimate expression of totalitarian logic, when ideology becomes more important than human life, when political loyalty supersedes maternal love. The result is atrocity. Those children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holder, Hedda, and Haida, died not in battle or by accident, but through deliberate choice by the person who should have protected them above all else. Magda's story stands as a permanent warning about the dangers of surrendering individual moral judgment to collective ideology. Her intelligence offered no protection, her education provided no defense, her maternal love proved insufficient when tested against ideological commitment. She chose loyalty to a doomed regime over the lives of her children, and that choice defines her legacy. The elegant face that once represented Nazi family propaganda is now remembered for the horror it concealed, the willingness to destroy everything, even innocent children, rather than admit that a life devoted to evil had been a catastrophic mistake.